All right, so this, of course, is the big story that we are tracking on WION Pulse after almost 7 years after breaking off diplomatic ties. Saudi Arabia and Iran have decided to re-establish their relations. And the kingmaker here is China. Top security officials from the two rivals in West Asia were in Beijing. But what is interesting is that this meeting remained undisclosed until now. China has reacted to this new deal. Beijing has described the deal as a victory for dialogue and peace. It has further said that Beijing is now willing to mediate in some pretty tough global issues. Differences between Iran and Saudi Arabia are a global issue, something that even the United States of America has failed to resolve. But China has now clearly broken the ice between these two regional powerhouses that have remained rivals for decades. The deal is going to see a sort of a ripple effect. West Asia is staring at a shift in its geopolitics. And all of this also comes on a day when Xi Jinping, remember, has cemented his historic third term as the president of China. It's been clear since last year's Chinese Communist Party meeting that Beijing is trying to expand its blueprint. And since the scrapping of the zero-COVID policy, Beijing is now ready to re-enter into commerce and geopolitics in a very big way. And West Asia is definitely not off the limits. West Asia is, of course, one of the first forays that China has made into, and this appears to be a pretty big success. Xi Jinping visited Saudi Arabia just 3 months ago, and then last month, Beijing also hosted the Iranian president, Ibrahim Raisi. So along with geopolitics, diplomacy is also shifting in a pretty big way. To give you a little background, Iran and Saudi Arabia are two major Muslim powers in the Gulf. One is a Shiite-dominated, that is Iran, and Saudi Arabia, of course, is a Sunni kingdom. So issues between them were fairly evident. From Yemen to Syria, the two have seen many proxy wars. In 2016, the thread broke. Riyadh executed a Shiite Muslim cleric, and Tehran barged into the Saudi embassy. And the two, of course, had broken off their diplomatic ties back then. But now, in what is a pretty big diplomatic shift, after 7 years of breaking off their diplomatic ties, Saudi Arabia and Iran have decided to re-establish their relations. And to give us more perspective in terms of how this is likely to affect the geopolitics in West Asia and indeed in the larger region, we're being joined by retired Colonel David Desroches, who is also a professor at the Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies. He's joining us live on this broadcast. Now, Colonel Desroches, this is a big moment in West Asia, is it not? Saudi Arabia and Iran, which for decades had been rivals, they've now agreed to re-establish their diplomatic ties. What do you make of this?
Well, it's a very big step. It's an important step. It's necessary but not sufficient. So this isn't the resolution of decades of conflict. This basically goes back to where the two countries were in 2016 before the Saudi embassy in Tehran was stormed. So what it basically says is that countries that hadn't had diplomatic relations are restoring diplomatic relations. And I think that what is good about this is, wars can arise from two things. They can arise from determined, desire to start a war and win it, which is what Putin's done in Ukraine, or they can arise from misunderstanding and misapprehension. Nobody likes that. Right. And the fact that they now have embassies reduces the chance of the second.
Absolutely, indeed. And also considering the fact that it is a deal that has been mediated by China. It's been announced on the day when Xi Jinping has, of course, become a president of China for an unprecedented third term. How do you see China's foray into West Asia? Because the United States has a lot of stakes in West Asia. It's a close ally of the Saudis, but the relationship has been on and off in the last few years, ever since Mohammed bin Salman has taken charge in Riyadh. But Iran is a nation that the United States has a lot of problems with. But now, another big power, China, has helped these two nations come together. What do you make of this?
Well, I think actually we welcome it, to be honest. I mean, look, not everything China does is viewed as malign. Obviously, given the issues between the United States and Iran, we're not in a position to mediate between Iran and anybody else. China is a major commercial player in the Gulf, and there is informal cooperation. I mean, much of China's economy depends on the traffic of goods by sea from West Asia. And that safe traffic is ensured by the United States Navy together with its partners. So, this is China can have a win, and that doesn't have to be a defeat for the United States. I think this is a positive step. And honestly, if China mediated the reestablishment of relationships, or Paraguay, or even the Martians, I think it'd still be a good thing, and I think it'd still be welcome. Right. But yeah, let them have their moment and let them bask in it.
Absolutely, indeed. Now, the United States has been backing the Abraham Accords. It's helped the state of Israel to actually try and normalize its relations with some of these Arab nations. We've witnessed that. But Iran and Israel in the region of West Asia are, to put it lightly, are rivals who do not see eye to eye on several issues. There have been reports that probably Israel would want to, in fact, stage an attack on some of the nuclear sets that Iran is developing. But considering that now Saudi Arabia and Iran have patched up some of their differences, at least on the face of it, do you think this is now likely to realign the power equations in West Asia?
No, I think that's reading too much into it. I mean, look, all they agreed was to reestablish embassies, which again, that stopped when the Iranians stormed the Saudi embassy in Tehran, which is a violation of all protocols. They've agreed to establish normal relations. They've agreed to establish embassies. They've agreed to basically the interactions that the United States has with Russia and with China. So this is a necessary step, but it's not a fundamental realignment. It's just a reversion to where they were in 2016.
All right, very interesting. Now, my last question to you, Colonel, is this. The United States has been seeking to try and isolate Iran as much as possible. That was a policy that Donald Trump followed, the policy of maximum pressure on Tehran to try and wean it away from its nuclear program. That did not succeed. Even under Joe Biden, the policy seems to be pretty much that, to try and isolate Iran as much as possible. But with China now willing to actually play ball with Tehran, do you think the United States can succeed in trying to isolate Iran?
Well, good question. So China has never really been involved in the isolation campaign of Tehran. They've always been a major player there. They struck a deal during the maximum pressure era to receive oil in exchange for Chinese products, which the Iranians called oil for junk, apparently inferior products. I think that it's important to keep the economic and diplomatic issues separate. The establishment of diplomatic relations does not necessarily mean the establishment of economic and trading relations. And China doesn't really gain anything other than prestige here. The other point I'd make here is that sanctions, there are unrealistic expectations of sanctions. People think that, if sanctions are imposed and the regime is in power, a year later sanctions have failed. But what we've seen is that key elements of Iranian weaponry, such as their ability to project power through large commercial aircraft, which they use to funnel troops to Syria, or to mount cameras on their drones. Their drones are flying blind in Ukraine, which is why the Ukrainians are able to shoot down 15 out of 18. Those have been hindered by sanctions. So there is an impact. It's just not as big as some people wrongly, in my opinion, have expected.
All right. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Colonel,
Thank you
for joining us and getting us all those insights there.
It's an honor.